Hey everybody, in this week's video we're going to be making a ring with a tungsten core. We're going to take some of these large white opal chunks and we're going to attach them on there with a little bit of CA glue, just a little bit. And then we're going to dye some of this alumilite with this carbon pigment and make a nice casting. So I put the tungsten core on a mandrel just so it's easier to hold. And I'm just going to make a little bead of the CA glue on my table, and what I'm going to do is just grab a small chunk of opal and just dip it in the CA just a little bit and then let it stick to the band. And then we're just going to keep repeating this process in a kind of random order until we've covered the whole core, and that way we can get a nice even distribution of our white opals on there. It's a little hectic deciding where to put these on the band, but I think it looks okay. So now that we have the entire thing covered, we can go ahead and get to work on our casting. This is probably the most important step of this ring. I have to make an inner and an outer mold out of some cardstock, and I have to completely seal the bottom so that when I fill it up with the resin, it won't be forced out, because we're going to put this in a pressure pot so that there's no air bubbles at all. But I'm going to go ahead and show this whole process of how I make this mold because it can be kind of complicated. Now that we have our casting done, we're going to mix our resin. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, and this is a small amount that I'm using, so using something like a vial like this to measure it out to get a good mix is really important, because if you don't have a 1-to-1 on the hardener and resin, then it'll come out either really cloudy or it won't cure up all the way, and then you would have just wasted a ton of time. So I use this little vial and only go about 1.5 on each one. And once we have it in the cup, we're just going to add our black pigment and mix it up. And alumilite's great too because it has a really long working time, and that's really thin, so it mixes up quickly and is really forgiving. So we're going to go ahead and do that and then get our resin in the molding. Now the resin is totally mixed, so we can just begin pouring. We're just going to start on one side and slowly fill and let it completely work its way around the mold. And that way we don't pour over and end up with any big and trapped air bubbles in there. This is just the best way to get a good even molding in here. So now we're going to take our cast and put it in the pressure pot, and what this does is puts the cast under air pressure so that the tiny bubbles inside of the viscous resin shrink and you can't even see them. If you have a pressure pot, this is the easiest way to get a really clear cast without any large bubbles that'll be like a real eyesore on the ring. And you're putting this thing under a lot of pressure, so when you're wrenching down these clamps, you really can't have them tight enough. I've noticed if I don't like turn them all the way until they won't turn anymore, around 40 psi, you'll start to hear the top of the pot hiss, so you really want to get them as tight as you can. So I have the air compressor hooked up to the pot, and we're slowly filling it with the compressed air. And you really don't want to do this too quickly because you could blow your mold and knock it over by forcing air into the pot too quickly. So we'll just take our time and fill it all the way to about 45 psi. You want to leave it in there until it's dry. That'll usually take an hour or two, but then you can take it out and you can see that it has completely set up. The last step to cure is to put it in an oven at 150 for about an hour. And then once we're done with that, we can take it to the belt sander and really grind down all the excess paper and casting for the mold. It took about 15 minutes and an entire belt, but it's all the way down to the tungsten now. This makes it really easy to pull that core out of there because we can't get it on a ring mandrel if it's got all that resin inside of it. So we're just gonna chip that away, and then eventually we'll be able to pull that whole piece off. Now that it's on a ring mandrel, we can put it on the lathe and turn it down all the way until we find that opal near the core. This will take a little while, so we're just going to use a tungsten rougher, and we're going to work our way down. And once we get close, we'll just switch to sandpaper, go through a couple different grits before we clear coat it. Our last step is going to be to clear coat in Alumi UV. It's super easy and convenient to use, and it has the same hardness as alumilite casts. All you have to do is use a paintbrush and you'll put a thick coat on there because it's a very viscous resin, and then you'll give it a UV bath for about 5 minutes and it'll cure up. And you can do multiple coats. I usually like to scuff it up with some steel wool between each one to get a good mechanical grip, but after a few coats it creates a really nice glass finish on this ring. I really like the way the ring came out, and I liked being able to use the pressure pot and the UV bath. Those are new pieces of equipment for me. I'm going to be critical and say that I probably will go with smaller opals next time, because I wanted them to kind of be lurking like in the black, and the bigger ones are just really in your face. You can see there's some smaller ones under there, and that's kind of what I was going for. But I can't complain other than that. I just want to say thanks for all the support over the last few weeks. I've been getting a lot more views than I ever thought I would. If you like this one, please subscribe. If you didn't like it, thanks for watching anyway, and I'll have another one up next week.